Welcome back to Tell Me More Stories Told Us podcast. Today, we're diving deep beneath the bustling streets of New York City. Back to February 26, 1993, a seemingly ordinary Friday. But beneath the iconic Twin Towers, a ticking time bomb was about to change history forever. The 1993 World Trade Center bombing.
It's a story that's often overshadowed by the events of 9/11. But understanding this earlier attack, it's crucial to understanding the evolution of terrorism on the world stage.
Exactly. So let's start with the mastermind behind this horrific plot, Ramzi Yousef. What can you tell us about him?
Ramzi Yousef, he was a brilliant but incredibly ruthless terrorist. He illegally entered the U.S. in 1992, traveling with an accomplice, Ahmed Ajaj. Though they tried to appear unconnected, interestingly, Ajaj was actually caught in JFK Airport with bomb-making instructions. Talk about an early warning sign.
Wow, that's a chilling detail. So even at that early stage, there were hints of what was to come.
Unfortunately, yes. And Yousef himself. He was incredibly meticulous in his planning. He assembled a team, acquired chemicals, even staging a car crash injury to explain his need for certain chemicals.
It's almost unbelievable how much thought and planning went into this attack. And his target, the World Trade Center, was clearly chosen for its symbolic value. What was Yousef ultimately hoping to achieve?
He wanted to inflict mass casualties and terror, aiming for 250,000 deaths. He even outlined his chilling goals and demands in letters sent to newspapers, demanding the U.S. stop supporting Israel. He was determined to send a message that would reverberate around the world.
It's a terrifying thought, and it really speaks to the calculated nature of this attack. Now, let's talk about the bomb itself. It wasn't just any explosive. It was an incredibly sophisticated device.
Yep. Right. Yousef, aided by Iraqi bomb maker Abdul Rahman Yassin, created a 1,500-pound behemoth using a unique blend of chemicals. One of the key ingredients was urea nitrate, which at that point, the FBI had only encountered once before in a bomb. It was a clear sign of Yousef's advanced knowledge and his willingness to push the boundaries of bomb making.
So, this wasn't some hastily assembled device. It was a carefully constructed weapon of terror. It's unsettling to think how much damage a bomb like that could inflict.
Yeah.
Speaking of unsettling, can we just take a quick pause to remind you, our amazing listeners, to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our upcoming deep dives on Tell Me More. Okay, back to the story. Can you describe what happened when the bomb detonated?
At 12:18 p.m., the bomb exploded in the World Trade Center's underground parking garage, plunging the entire complex into chaos. It created a 100-foot wide crater spanning 4 sublevels, severing the main power line and plunging the towers into darkness.
So the immediate impact was darkness and confusion. What was the scene like inside the towers?
It was terrifying. Thick smoke filled the stairwells, making evacuation a harrowing ordeal. Hundreds of people were trapped in elevators after the power went out.
I can't even imagine the fear and panic those people must have experienced. It must have felt like a nightmare.
Absolutely. And there was one particularly poignant story about a group of 17 kindergartners who were stuck in an elevator between floors for 5 hours.
5 hours trapped in a dark elevator. That's heartbreaking and gives you a real sense of the chaos and fear that gripped the World Trade Center that day.
And the impact. It wasn't limited to the World Trade Center complex. The blast disrupted broadcasting and communication throughout New York City, severing television and radio broadcasts for almost a week. The city was reeling from the attack.
So even though the towers remained standing, this attack had far-reaching consequences that extended far beyond the physical damage.
Absolutely. It was a wake-up call, a stark reminder of the very real threat of terrorism, and a chilling foreshadowing of the horrors that were yet to come.
It's incredible to think about the scale of the impact, both within the towers and across the city. Even though the towers didn't collapse, the attack still resulted in casualties.
Right. Sadly, yes. 6 people tragically lost their lives in the attack, including a pregnant woman, and over 1,000 people were injured, some in the blast itself, others during the chaotic evacuation.
It's a stark reminder of the human cost of terrorism, even when the attacker's ultimate goals are thwarted. What about the physical damage to the World Trade Center? Was it expensive?
The repairs ended up costing an estimated $250 million. It took months for the towers and all of the businesses within them to fully reopen. It was a long and difficult road to recovery for everyone involved.
Beyond the physical and financial costs, there was also the psychological impact on New Yorkers and people around the world. The World Trade Center was a symbol of American strength and prosperity, and to see it attacked like this must have been incredibly unsettling.
It was. The attack shattered the illusion of invulnerability and sent shockwaves across the globe. It forced people to confront the reality of a new kind of enemy, one that was willing to strike at the heart of symbolic targets, causing mass casualties and spreading fear and chaos.
So in a way, this attack foreshadowed the kind of terrorism that would become all too familiar in the years to come. Now, let's shift gears and talk about the investigation. After the dust settled, authorities launched a massive effort to bring the perpetrators to justice. Right.
Absolutely. The investigation was a complex and challenging undertaking, but authorities were determined to leave no stone unturned. They were also facing a new reality. The evolving threat of terrorism was becoming more sophisticated and harder to predict.
And the investigation took some interesting turns, didn't it? I'm thinking specifically about the FBI's use of an informant, Emad Salem. What was his role in all of this?
Salem, a former Egyptian army officer, played a crucial role in the investigation. He had infiltrated Yousef's group and provided valuable information to the FBI. However, his involvement also sparked controversy.
What kind of controversy?
Well, Salem alleged that the FBI had actually been involved in the construction of the bomb. He claimed to have secretly recorded conversations with his FBI handlers. That supported these allegations.
Hold on. The FBI involved in building the bomb?
Yeah.
That's a pretty serious accusation.
It was. And it raised a lot of questions about the events leading up to the bombing. The FBI denied Salem's claims, and the New York Times analyzed the tapes and concluded that it was unclear to what extent the FBI knew about the specific plan to bomb the World Trade Center.
So it remains a bit of a mystery. Did the investigation ultimately lead to the capture and arrest of the perpetrators?
Yes, it did. Several conspirators were quickly apprehended, including Emad Salem, who rented the van used to transport the bomb. It was actually his attempt to get his deposit back on the van that led investigators to him.
Wow, that's almost too perfect. Talk about a lucky break for the investigators. What about Ramzi Yousef, the mastermind? Did they ever catch him?
He managed to escape to Pakistan after the bombing, but justice eventually caught up with him.
How did they finally track him down?
It was actually the Diplomatic Security Service, the DSS for short, who apprehended him. Two agents, Bill Miller and Jeff Reiner, received a tip about Yousef's location, and working with Pakistani intelligence, they captured him in a raid.
It's incredible to think that this global manhunt eventually led to his capture. What happened to Yousef and the other conspirators after they were arrested?
They were all put on trial in March 1994. It was a major media event, and the world watched as the details of the plot unfolded in the courtroom.
What was the atmosphere like during the trial?
The courtroom was packed with victims' families, survivors, journalists, and security personnel. You could feel the weight of the tragedy, and the stakes were incredibly high. The tension was palpable.
I can only imagine. What were the charges against them?
They faced a slew of serious charges, including conspiracy, explosive destruction of property, and interstate transportation of explosives.
Those are some serious charges. What was the outcome?
4 of the conspirators, Mahmoud Abu Halima, Ahmad Ajaj, Nidal Ayad, and Emad Salem, were found guilty and each sentenced to 240 years in prison.
Wow, 240 years. That's basically a life sentence.
It was. The sentences reflected the severity of the crime and sent a clear message that acts of terrorism would not be tolerated. But the story doesn't end there. Yousef himself wasn't extradited and tried until later, and there were other lingering questions and controversies surrounding the case.
Like what?
Well, for one, what about Abdul Rahman Yassin, the Iraqi bomb maker who helped Yousef build the device? He fled to Iraq after the bombing and was never captured by U.S. authorities.
So he just disappeared?
Not quite. He actually resurfaced in 1998, giving an interview to Leslie Stahl for 60 Minutes. He was apparently being held as a prisoner in Iraq at the time, but after that interview, he vanished again, becoming a ghost in this story.
It's almost like he stepped out of the pages of a spy novel, appearing and disappearing throughout history. Were there any other controversies surrounding the case?
There were also lingering questions about the possible involvement of the Iraqi government in the bombing. Some theorized that Yousef was working for Iraqi intelligence, but others, including FBI investigators who worked on the case, disputed those claims. The extent of Iraqi involvement, if any, remains a mystery.
So even after the trial, the 1993 bombing continued to generate questions and speculation. But beyond the immediate aftermath, the attack had a lasting impact on security measures, counterterrorism efforts, and even sparked complex legal battles, right? It's amazing how this one event continues to unravel, revealing new layers of complexity even years later. You mentioned legal battles. What were those about?
Well, in the wake of the bombing, the victims, including families of those who lost their lives, filed lawsuits seeking damages.
Who are they suing? And what were their claims?
Their target was the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, the agency responsible for managing the World Trade Center. Their argument was that the Port Authority had failed to implement sufficient security measures, despite warnings about the World Trade Center's vulnerability to a terrorist attack.
So they believed the Port Authority was negligent in its duty to protect the people. Who worked in and visited the World Trade Center?
Exactly. And in a surprising turn of events, a jury actually agreed. In 2005, they found the Port Authority 68% liable for the bombing, holding them more responsible than the terrorists themselves, who were deemed only 32% responsible.
Wait, the Port Authority was held more accountable than the terrorists, who actually planned and carried out the attack. That seems pretty controversial.
It was. The Port Authority vehemently disagreed with the verdict, calling it bizarre, and appealing the decision. They argued that holding them more accountable than the terrorists set a dangerous precedent.
What was the outcome of the appeal?
It was a long and drawn-out process, with the case bouncing back and forth in the courts for years. Initially, a New York State appeals court upheld the jury's verdict in 2008. But then in 2011, the New York Court of Appeals overturned the ruling in a close 4-3 decision.
So the Port Authority was ultimately cleared of any liability.
Yes. The court argued that the terrorists' actions were so unforeseeable and extraordinary that the Port Authority couldn't have reasonably anticipated or prevented them.
That must have been a devastating blow to the victims' families and survivors who had been fighting for justice for so long.
It was. The legal battle, which had dragged on for years, ended with a sense of frustration and disappointment for many. It also sparked a broader debate about the challenges of assigning responsibility and seeking justice after such horrific acts.
It's a reminder that sometimes, even with a trial and a verdict, there's no real sense of closure or resolution.
That's true, but it's important to remember that the 1993 bombing wasn't just about legal battles and assigning blame. It also had a profound impact on how we approach security, especially for iconic landmarks and potential targets of terrorism.
You mentioned earlier that the bombing led to some improvements in security measures at the World Trade Center. What specific changes were implemented?
The Port Authority, despite the legal challenges, took steps to enhance security. They implemented stricter screening procedures for vehicles entering the parking garage, increased surveillance, and even installed barriers to prevent unauthorized vehicles from getting close to the towers.
So in a way, they were trying to learn from their mistakes and make the World Trade Center a safer place.
They were. But the 1993 bombing also exposed a broader need for enhanced security measures across the country. It highlighted the vulnerability of critical infrastructure and the evolving tactics of terrorist organizations.
It's fascinating how this one event, as tragic as it was, became a catalyst for such significant changes. How did the 1993 attack shape counterterrorism efforts in the United States?
It was a major wake-up call. It led to increased funding for intelligence agencies, the expansion of surveillance programs, and greater cooperation between domestic and international law enforcement agencies. Essentially, it forced a shift in mindset, leading to a more proactive and coordinated approach to counterterrorism.
It's incredible to think about how much changed as a result of this attack. But it also sparked a debate about the balance between security and freedom, didn't it? How much were we, as a society, willing to sacrifice in terms of privacy and civil liberties in the name of safety?
That's a question that continues to be debated today. The 1993 bombing, and of course the 9/11 attacks that followed, dramatically shifted the balance towards security. But it also raised concerns about government overreach and the potential erosion of civil liberties.
It's a difficult balancing act, and there are no easy answers. Looking back at everything we've discussed, what do you think are the most important takeaways from the 1993 World Trade Center bombing?
It's a complex event with multiple layers of significance, but I think the most crucial takeaway is that complacency can be dangerous. The 1993 bombing showed us that even the most iconic and seemingly secure structures are vulnerable to attack. It underscored the evolving nature of the terrorist threat and the need for vigilance and adaptation.
It's also a powerful reminder to learn from the past. We should never forget the victims of this attack and the sacrifices made by first responders, and everyone who worked tirelessly to rebuild and recover.
Absolutely. Their stories are a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, even in the face of unimaginable tragedy. And as we continue to face new challenges and threats in the world today, it's crucial to draw on the lessons learned from the 1993 bombing to help us build a safer and more secure future.
This has been a truly insightful journey through a pivotal moment in history. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. We hope you learned something new and gained a deeper understanding of this often overlooked event.
And if you're eager to delve into more captivating stories from history, be sure to subscribe to Tell Me More Stories Told as podcast. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.